Will come to order. Today, the committee meets to discuss the nomination of David Johnson to serve as Inspector General for Tax Administration. Let's start with his background. This is a nonpartisan, down-the-middle nominee for a position that requires exactly that type of individual. Mr. Johnson currently serves as the Assistant Inspector General for Investigations at the Department of Veterans Affairs, which, in my view, is a key oversight role at the second largest federal agency. He previously served as a federal prosecutor in several positions. That includes several years as Assistant Chief in the Fraud Section of the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice. He also served as Assistant United States Attorney and Healthcare Fraud Coordinator at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. Independent oversight of the IRS, in my view, is in the best interest of all of American taxpayers. It is a challenging job. The Treasury Department has a separate Inspector General, but tax issues and the IRS, in my view, require their own special focus. TIGTA, as it's known to those who work closely on these issues, is all about good government and protecting taxpayer dollars at the IRS. It helps improve tax administration, and it has an important role in fighting waste, fraud, and abuse. These are priorities for members on both sides of this dais. This committee depends on TIGTA to provide the public with unbiased information and nonpartisan oversight to help us do our work. In my view, Mr. Johnson is a highly qualified nominee. I'm looking forward to our discussion today. I look forward to processing this nomination as quickly as possible. Senator Crapo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And welcome to our nominee, Mr. Johnson. Congratulations on your nomination, and thank you for your willingness to serve. As the chairman has just indicated, you have been nominated to a position that carries great responsibility. Mr. Johnson, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration is an essential and independent voice overseeing the administration of the nation's tax system. The prior Inspector General, the late Honorable J. Russell George, faithfully served in this role for decades. Under his leadership, TIGTA provided steady, independent oversight, including during critical moments, such as the recent and unlawful theft and disclosure of tens of thousands of Americans' sensitive tax information. The impact of TIGTA's audit and investigative activities on taxpayers, the IRS, and on our nation's tax system cannot be understated. If confirmed, Mr. Johnson, you must faithfully lead TIGTA in executing this role and expanding on its capacity to provide oversight and insight. You must remain independent and vigilant. You must be responsive and candid. And members of our committee are eager to hear how you intend to fulfill these responsibilities. I look forward to hearing how you would approach this role. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Senator Crapo. Let me briefly introduce our nominee. I already touched on his background. He obviously has a long career in public service. He served for more than a decade as a federal prosecutor. He currently oversees a team of over 270 investigators for the IG's office at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Johnson, we thank you for being here. As is customary, your prepared statement will automatically be made a part of the record. Please proceed.
Thank you. Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and distinguished members of this committee. I am honored to appear before you today for consideration to be the Inspector General for Tax Administration at the Department of the Treasury. I want to thank the members and their staff for meeting with me during this process. I also want to thank my family, particularly my extraordinary wife and daughter, as well as all of my friends and colleagues for their support. The Inspector General for Tax Administration plays a critical role in government, providing independent and objective oversight of the Internal Revenue Service, which processes hundreds of millions of tax returns and collects trillions of dollars in revenue annually. If confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee and other members of Congress to maintain the integrity of the administration of our nation's tax laws and to combat fraud, waste, and abuse at the IRS. I have dedicated nearly my entire career to public service. The importance of civic engagement was instilled in me early on by my parents, both of whom served in government during portions of their own careers. My mother taught anatomy and physiology at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences, and my father served our country as a physician in the Army and the Navy, and later as a civilian employee with the Army. During my own career, I have served as a law clerk for a federal judge, a federal prosecutor at two different components of the Department of Justice, an enforcement attorney at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and now a federal law enforcement official at one of the largest offices of Inspector General in the country. As a naturalized United States citizen who was adopted from South Korea when I was 5 months old, I've had the privilege of delivering remarks on 3 occasions to fellow newly naturalized citizens at their naturalization ceremonies before presiding judges Rosemary Collier, whom I clerked for, Thomas Hogan, and Dabney Friedrich at the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. These experiences have reinforced my respect and admiration for our country and have equipped me with the requisite humility, judgment, knowledge, and skills to be the Inspector General for Tax Administration. I currently serve as a career member of the Senior Executive Service and the head of the Office of Investigations at the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. In this capacity, I lead a large and diverse staff comprising over 270 special agents, forensic accountants, analysts, specialists, and attorneys who conduct investigative oversight of the second largest federal agency. The VA OIG's mandate from Congress is momentous: to support our nation's military veterans and the VA programs that provide critical benefits to them and their families. Due to the massive size and scope of VA, my office handles a wide variety of complex and sensitive investigations, ranging from allegations of bribery and fraud schemes to homicides and sexual assaults. During my tenure as the Assistant Inspector General for Investigations, criminal and civil investigations at the VA OIG have resulted in billions of dollars in monetary benefits to VA and taxpayers, as well as convictions in significant violent crimes cases against veterans. In particular, special agents in my office led an investigation of a VA nursing assistant who administered insulin to murder 7 veterans and assault another at the VA Medical Center in Clarksburg, West Virginia. The former nursing assistant is now serving 7 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 240 months in prison for her heinous crimes. In addition to my management experience at the VA OIG, I have a strong background in enforcement and oversight rules as a former federal prosecutor and SEC trial counsel. I served as an assistant United States attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia for over 9 years. For most of my time as an AUSA, I was a senior prosecutor in the office's fraud and public corruption section, where I specialized in white-collar matters and worked with numerous offices of Inspector General due to my office's location in the nation's capital. Later, as a supervisory prosecutor in the fraud section of DOJ's criminal division, I supervised and handled cases involving transnational corruption, including foreign bribery and money laundering. At the SEC, I enforced the laws governing our nation's capital markets to protect investors, handling civil and administrative matters involving complex financial instruments and accounting issues. I am proud of the work that I have accomplished during my 20 years of public service, and if confirmed, will be honored to lead the Office of the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration in its important mission. The role of Inspectors General is vital to ensuring that our government operates economically, efficiently, and effectively. Inspectors General conduct independent fact-finding and make objective recommendations so that Congress and the agency head are fully and currently informed of any deficiencies in agency programs and can take appropriate action based on accurate and unbiased information. In my time at the VA OIG, I have focused investigative oversight resources on the most impactful issues facing VA and the veteran community. If confirmed, I will do the same for the IRS and provide candid, reliable, and pertinent information to Congress, the Treasury Secretary, and the IRS Commissioner to help improve the IRS's operations for the benefit of all Americans. Thank you for your consideration. I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Johnson. I understand you may have some family in the house today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. My wife is
Welcome.
with me as well. My daughter was with me, but she wasn't able to sit still, so she has
Your
respectfully.
wife's smile indicates she's not very proud. Glad you're here. I can tell. Glad you're here. We have some obligatory questions we've got to ask before we dive into the member questions. First, is there anything that you're aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office to which you've been nominated?
No, sir.
Second, do you know of any reason, personal or otherwise, that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office to which you've been nominated?
I do not.
Third, do you agree without reservation to respond to any reasonable summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Congress if you are confirmed?
Yes.
Finally, do you commit to provide a prompt response in writing to any questions addressed to you by any senator of this committee?
Yes.
Okay. I have a few questions. We've got colleagues here I know who have questions as well. And let me start with this, Mr. Johnson, if I might. The IRS continues to have a Herculean effort to modernize and secure their antiquated technology system. So how do you figure out a way to ensure that that continues while at the same time keeping Americans' tax returns safe from prying eyes, foreign and domestic?
Thank you for the question. I agree that that is an extremely important challenge facing IRS, and one that, if confirmed, I would prioritize and focus on. I'm obviously not at TIGTA yet, so I am only privy to publicly available information about reports of deficiencies in those types of systems. But based on the coverage, it appears that IRS absolutely needs to be modernizing its IT systems, making sure that it is both providing customer service to taxpayers so that they can easily complete their tax returns, that they understand what the tax requirements are, and also modernizing the systems so that the operations of the IRS are as efficient and effective as possible.
If you're confirmed as Inspector General, what actions will you lead at TIGTA to ensure that Americans are not being targeted for audit or investigation based on their political affiliations?
I believe that one of the core responsibilities of any Inspector General by statute is to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. And targeting of any American based on their political affiliation, to me, would be an extreme level of abuse. So if I receive allegations or proactively determine that anybody at IRS is taking any type of action of that nature, it would certainly be high on the priority list to take swift action from TIGTA and to make sure that stakeholders, including Congress, are informed so that Congress can take appropriate legislative action as well.
You would follow up on allegations quickly?
Yes.
It would be a top priority?
Yes.
Okay. As you're aware, former IRS Commissioner Don Alexander refused orders from President Richard Nixon to conduct IRS audits and investigations into individuals on the Nixon enemy list. Do you agree that it was an abuse of power for President Nixon to order the IRS to target his political opponents?
Yes, I agree that anybody ordering the IRS or asking the IRS to target political opponents or to take any action based on political identity would be an abuse of power and something that TIGTA would play a role in preventing.
Senator Crapo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Johnson, the chairman has just gone over a number of the issues I was going to go into with you, so I will not try to duplicate that too much. I do want to emphasize, though, what the chairman just finished on, and that is the targeting of political, using IRS audits to target political opponents. It didn't just happen back in the Nixon years. Many of us believe that it's still happening right now, and that it has happened under both types of administrations, Republicans and Democrats. And so I just would like to ask you to, once again, maybe put an exclamation point on your previous answer about how important it is that you use your office to make sure that the Internal Revenue Service, and particularly internal revenue audits, are not politically motivated.
I can respond by saying I have a proven track record of working apolitical, following evidence, and making objective decisions without regard to any type of political issues. As a former prosecutor, that's how cases were brought and determined, as an SEC enforcement attorney, and now as a senior executive at an Office of Inspector General. Our ethos is doing the right thing, being objective and independent, and so that is ingrained in the very core of my being, and I can guarantee to you that anyone who would abuse the IRS resources or any government resources to go after political enemies or to attack or target somebody based on their right to be any type of political affiliation, to me, strikes at the core of our democracy and something that would need to be remedied very quickly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And in other words, you need to call the balls and the strikes, regardless of politics.
Yes.
The IRS is a massive agency full of committed and dedicated public servants. It also has an unfortunate legacy of inefficiency, waste, and frankly, unacceptable, troubling episodes. A well-functioning TIGTA is an essential counterbalance to many of the things that ail the IRS, as well as a tool for amplifying and expanding its best actions. If confirmed, I know we're going over the same ground here, but if confirmed, I would just like you to commit to me that you'll be a tenacious, fair, and independent watchdog on behalf of the American people.
I can commit to that, and I believe that my background is evidence of my future performance.
Thank you. And finally, I just want to highlight another thing the chairman has already gone through, and that is, will you again commit to providing timely and thorough responses to this committee?
Yes, I believe that the relationship between Congress and any Inspector General should be strong. Obviously, there are independence and objective issues that need to be maintained according to the law, but I believe that coordinating with Congress, collaborating with Congress, and most importantly, making sure that Congress is informed of any issues, deficiencies, so that Congress can then, as a policymaker, choose to change legislation or change funding, either up or down, or maintain it, is extraordinarily important. And the IG's role is to make sure that Congress has the information and the recommendations that they can rely on to be able to make those important decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Crapo. Next in order of appearance is Senator Cortez Masto. Excuse me, Senator Blackburn just came into the room. Senator Blackburn is next.
Thank you, and thank you for being here before us this morning. Several times on this committee, I've talked about the concerns that I hear from small businesses in Tennessee, and a lot of times this has to do with being wrongfully targeted by the IRS, and we've discussed many times the importance of ensuring the IRS follow the 22 directive to stop any increase in the audit rates for taxpayers with annual incomes of less than $400,000. And you know, as we have gone past this and gone past that directive, I've had growing concerns about this, and there's been such a lack of clarity around it. And in August, the acting Treasury Inspector General confirmed that the Biden-Harris IRS has failed to develop a plan to prevent elevated audit rates against small businesses. Many of these file as pass-through entities, and so they get bumped up. And the administration had pledged that they were going to take care of this, and they have not. So without having that report, we wouldn't have known the extent of what is happening to these small businesses that have that gross of $400,000. And so if you're confirmed, will you commit to further reviewing these IRS audit processes to ensure compliance with that 2022 directive and the protections that need to be there for these small businesses that all of a sudden find themselves as the target of the IRS?
Well, thank you for the question. I certainly appreciate that this is something that is very important to you and your constituents. I believe that, I'm obviously not at TIGTA now, and one of the first things I need to do when I get there is assess the projects, past, current, and pending, to understand priorities. But given that TIGTA has already issued a report on this very issue, it would seem appropriate for follow-up. And so what I certainly will commit to is being briefed fully by TIGTA and doing my own assessment, and then reaching out to your staff and you to make sure that your concerns are being appropriately addressed.
Well, it's the concern of the taxpayer
Yes.
who has seen an increased audit rate and find that they are being trapped in this. So yes, it needs to be done. I want to talk to you about direct file, because this is a program that got put in place. It didn't have congressional approval. It's costing about $250 million a year. And I think it's something that is diverting funds that are needed to modernize the IRS and to use technology. And when you look at the reviews on this, the IRS has not been transparent about key aspects of this program. They've not come forward on what really are the true costs. What is the actual acceptance rates? What are the fraud risks that are involved with this? So I'd like for you to talk about how your oversight experience might help you work with Congress to ensure that lawmakers do have an accurate assessment of this program and whether or not it should be continued.
Thank you again for that question. I wholeheartedly agree that one of the core missions of any Inspector General is to ensure that Congress has the information it needs to make its policy decisions. And I do believe on any issue of concern that TIGTA will be looking at issues to make sure that accurate information is being provided, including indirect file.
Well, I think that as we talk with constituents in Tennessee, when you look at the failures of the direct file project, and it almost appears to have been haphazardly put in place, and there needs to be a serious review of this before it becomes one of these things that is, well, we're doing it this way because we've always done it this way, and we don't want that to happen. And the audit practices at the IRS, this is something that needs a solid review, and we would appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague, and I would only say, as a very strong supporter of direct file, which essentially began almost in the seat that you occupy. When Dan Coates joined me in a bipartisan effort, we will have that debate. I don't believe we're going to have time today for a big debate on it, but I look forward to talking to all my colleagues, and just wanted to make the historical reference of Dan Coates and making this bipartisan. Look forward to a bigger conversation on it. Next will be Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Johnson, congratulations on your nomination. Welcome to your family. And it's great to hear from you. I appreciate your comments about the importance of the independence of the IG and nonpartisan, and just focusing on really the mission of the office. So thank you. I'm curious, you're currently the Inspector General at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Thank you very much. What major lessons have you learned from that role that you're going to carry with you into this one?
So I think the biggest issue that I will carry from OIG is how OIG should operate. So I am the head of investigations at VA OIG, which is one of the largest OIGs. We have almost 12,000 employees that provide oversight over an agency that has over 400,000 employees and an over $300 billion budget that has arguably the most critical mission of any federal agency, that is to take care of our veterans who have served our country. And so we understand that mandate and the professionalism and the work ethic of all the members of my OIG And the way that we go about our business, we really look for what is the most impactful matter that we can look at. Because we are limited in resources and the VA is so large, we don't want to be focused on small matters or one-offs. We want to be looking at the things that are going to have the greatest positive impact ultimately for veterans. And so I think being able to prioritize the most important issues and then determining the best way to address them, whether it's through an examination or an audit, performance or financial, or an investigation, is one of the experiences that I will bring with me and that will help guide me in my capacity if confirmed as the Inspector General for Tax Administration. We, as one of the larger OIGs, use a lot of different tools to help make VA as efficient and effective as possible. We use sophisticated investigative strategies. We have to deploy a lot of different types of resource relating to IT and cyber, healthcare. We have an entire directorate that assesses patient safety issues because the VA has the largest integrated healthcare system in the United States. And that is a huge mandate that the VA OIG has and that our Inspector General identified. And then we obviously provide other types of special reviews and audits and evaluations to ensure the effective running of the VA. But having experience working with the second largest federal agency, I think will help guide me. The IRS is also an extraordinarily large agency. As I mentioned in my opening statement, it processes hundreds of millions of returns and is responsible for collecting trillions of dollars in revenue. It touches the lives of every single American because the IRS funds government. And it touches every single taxpayer who has to file taxes and go through that process.
So can I ask you, because you talked about the tools that were necessary to support veterans, artificial intelligence, it's going to present opportunities and challenges. How do you see that being utilized for your purposes when it comes to customer service for the IRS?
Sure, I already see AI being looked at very carefully by VA. There are a number of different groups and projects in the pipeline. And at our OIG, we are similarly making sure that we are staying current on AI issues and then ready to make decisions to use or not use it as we determine to be appropriate. It is obviously somewhat of a fledgling technology, so I think we have to be careful and not rush into things. But like with any technology, we believe that ultimately it will be used and it can be used with the right constraints to help. And again, just to be clear, any technology or any process that we ultimately determine will benefit veterans, we're going to take a very hard look at and want to implement. And I would say the same thing at the IRS. If AI or any other type of technology can improve customer service, can streamline the process of filing returns and getting credits and other refunds back, I believe that that would be something that should be looked at very carefully. I think that's more of a policy decision for the IRS to make a determination about. TIGTA's role would be more assessing its effectiveness, safety, and ultimately productivity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank my colleagues. So normally Senator Helmy would be next, but in the spirit of collegiality, he has indicated he'd like Senator Casey to be next. So Senator Casey, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much. I appreciate this opportunity, Mr. Johnson. Great to be with you. I wanted to start with what we've already made reference to in this hearing, and Senator Cortez Masto made reference to, and I'll just reiterate it because it's about as essential as anything, and that's the absolute independence that you must exercise in this role. There are a few roles in government where the kind of independence that you've got to demonstrate will be as important in your work as the Inspector General for administration at the Treasury Department. I have some experience with this. When I was a state official, I was elected state auditor general in our state. Many states call it the auditor or some other terms like comptroller or controller. But I learned in that position about how essential it was to be truly independent. So that meant if you were doing an audit or an investigation of a state agency, whether it was during a Democratic administration or Republican administration, you had to call it as you saw it, and you had to be tough-minded about being independent. And I know you take that responsibility seriously. And I just want to ask you a couple questions that in essence reiterate some of the points that were made earlier, but I think it's important for people to hear a recitation of that before we have a vote on your confirmation. First, do you agree that the tax system should be impartial and fair, and that tax policy should be administered without regard to politics or without regard to personal agendas, whether that the politics or personal agenda would be that of a IRS employee or the Treasury Secretary or any member of Congress in either House of Congress or even the President of the United States?
Yes, I believe that the administration of our tax laws should be faithful to the statutes that Congress has passed.
And as Inspector General, would you maybe get a better sense of what you would do? I'll frame it that way. As Inspector General, what would you do to ensure the integrity of our nation's tax system and to prevent and expose interference in tax administration by future administrations of either party?
So I do believe that combating fraud, waste, and abuse is one of the core mandates of any Inspector General, and something that would be high on the priority list for TIGTA if I were confirmed as that Inspector General. If you look at my background and experiences, I've been doing that virtually since I got out of law school, from working for a federal judge, which again is an apolitical position, to being a federal prosecutor, an SEC enforcement attorney, and now a senior executive at NOIG. It's instilled in my being, the fiber of my being, to be independent. And I also believe in the rule of law. And the Inspector General Act provides very clear direction on how inspectors are supposed to act and what they're supposed to do, and that is to be independent and objective units within an agency. And so that means, by statute, I need to be nonpartisan, unbiased, and calling balls and strikes, and making sure that I'm identifying the most impactful issues for Congress to take action, for the agency head to take actions, and that when you get information from me, it's going to be something that will be reliable, because ultimately, inspectors general do not have authority to make any changes at an agency. All we can do is shine a light on issues that we believe are important. Policymakers, such as Congress, make the ultimate decisions about legislation and appropriation of funds. And if I am not providing accurate information that is unbiased, then what I'll be writing down in reports will be unheeded. And so I believe that the reputation for TIGTA and every Inspector General is paramount to their success. And I want my Inspector General, my Office of Inspector General, if I'm confirmed, to be successful. And that will be based on the fact that every member of this committee, every member of Congress, can rely on the fact-finding and recommendations coming out of my office.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank my colleague, Senator Helmy.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Johnson, I'd start by echoing our Chairman and Ranking Member for thanking you for your long career, and your wife and your daughter for your long career of public service, and would add, based on your testimony, your responses, and your resume, that I personally think you're amply qualified for the role.
Thank you.
I got my start just a number of years ago in D.C. terms as a caseworker for Senator Frank Lautenberg, a great champion for the people of New Jersey. So many of my questions will be what I think is within the scope of your office in terms of waste and abuse and driving timeliness and accountability for the IRS. Over the past few years, the IRS has dramatically been able to improve the quality of customer services, thanks in part to the funding provided by this committee and the Congress and the IRA. In FY24, 88% of callers who called into the IRS were able to speak personally to a representative with an average wait time that was reduced to only a handful of minutes. For comparison, just a few years ago, only 17% of callers were answered within 27 minutes. How do you see your office playing a role in ensuring that the IRS continues to make significant progress in its support for taxpayer support services.
So based on my review of publicly available information, it does appear that taxpayer services would be one of the top priorities for TIGTA, and one that we would continually be looking at in a variety of capacities. I do believe that providing recurring reports on some of these big issues can help in terms of notifying Congress about the status of call centers and processing of refunds and other important issues. So I do believe that one thing that I would do if I were confirmed would be to continue to focus the spotlight on those important issues and provide updates so that Congress can see whether there are positive trends, negative trends, or whether things are leveling off. And I think that that can help inform not only you, but the agency's head about the effectiveness of whatever programs they are beefing up and how they are.
Yeah, I think it's a really important answer, and thank you for that. I think it would be welcome that Congress receive those reports on the timeliness of our constituents getting a response and being able to talk personally to a representative. It is where government sort of hits the road and where constituents really feel the work of the federal government. In my prior role as Chief of Staff to the Governor, we almost mandated that across the board, where we had still call-in centers, especially during the COVID response, of how quickly people were getting a live person on the phone. I think that's a welcome response. An area where I think there's opportunity for significant improvement, and would ask if you're confirmed that you take a look at this, is the average processing time for amended return, which at this point can be up to, as an average, 20 weeks. That means a family that makes a small mistake on the return can end up waiting 4 to 5 months for a full refund. How would you ensure that we can do better for the working families of New Jersey and the country in that area?
So again, I'm not the Inspector General at TIGTA yet. I'm not working at that agency yet. So what I would certainly want to commit to you is that I understand it's an important issue. It's something that I will be looking into, be getting briefed on day one. And after, again, making my own assessment of the situation in terms of what products we should be working on, what's in the pipeline, follow up with you and your staff to ensure that it's being appropriately looked at.
I would just encourage you to look into that quickly, having, in preparation for this hearing, talk to my casework team. Sometimes we're seeing really minor mistakes not being handled for 5 months, and these are families that are obviously in need, given the tough economic times for some families on these amendments. My last question, sir, would be, under this administration, the IRS has significantly stepped up the enforcement efforts focused on large partnerships and corporations, as well as high-income individuals who may have avoided their tax responsibility. It's a long overdue step in closing the tax gap without increasing the burden on middle-class families. In September, the IRS reported that it was able to collect $1.1 billion in previously unpaid taxes from about 1,600 high-income individuals. For comparison, that by itself is enough to fund the CFTC. If confirmed, will you and how will you continue to review the IRS's audit selection to ensure that using its resources to clamp down on high-yield tax evasion?
I've heard from several staff members that this is an issue, enforcement, in terms of priorities for IRS and how it is determining which entities to focus on for audits and other things. So I do believe, with the usual caveats that I'm not there yet, that that would be something that I would be looking at very early on and trying to make an assessment.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague, and let me say to him that it is not clear what the schedule is going to be between now and the end of the year. And I just want to take this opportunity to say it's been a pleasure to have you as a member of the committee. I've especially enjoyed our conversations about health care, and I will say to my colleagues, find a way to discuss health care with our new friend from New Jersey, because I want it understood so that New Jerseyans understand it and the country understands it. I believe some of your ideas about health care are going to become law in the years ahead. May not be tomorrow or the next day, but stay tuned. They're going to become law someday.
Thank you,
Senator
Mr. Chairman.
Hassan's next.
It's been the honor of a lifetime serving under you. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hassan's next.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll echo your words towards our colleague from New Jersey. It's been a real pleasure and an honor. To Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here and for the work you already do. I'm going to hit on a couple of the same themes you've heard from others this morning, but let's start with the independence of inspectors general. The Inspector General for Tax Administration plays a key role in ensuring that all Americans are treated fairly under the tax code. I've worked across the aisle with my colleagues to strengthen the independence of inspectors general across all of the federal government. Taxpayers obviously deserve, as we do in every agency, a vigilant watchdog on their behalf. As Inspector General, how will you maintain your independence in your work on behalf of taxpayers?
That's a great question. As I've said before, I have a proven track record of being objective and independent in my roles in the federal government as a former federal prosecutor, as an SEC enforcement attorney, and now at an OIG where I'm a senior executive and live exactly what you're talking about, which is to maintain independence. Obviously, we coordinate with our parent agency,
right.
And I believe that having productive conversations are part of the statute and part of how the IG is supposed to work. It's not necessarily adversarial, but it does need to be independent. And so there are things that the IG has to tell the secretary at the VA, it's the VA secretary, that are uncomfortable truths. But ultimately the goal from all entities, including on the Hill, is that the agency work, at its optimum, that it is providing the services to its constituents, that it is being efficient, that it is not wasting money. And so we really all share the same goal, even if there may be parts of the agency that are having to be criticized. And so I believe that if you have a relationship of trust and integrity, if the secretary knows that what you are going to say is really for the betterment of the agency, not to score political points, not to get your name in the paper. If you build that level of trust, then when you do say you've got a problem and we're about to issue a report and we're going to outline what facts we found and what recommendations we have for you, it has a greater chance of actually getting implemented, which I think is really important. If you have an adversarial relationship where there's levels of distrust, then ultimately the IG will be ineffective with, I think, the agency head. So my goal would be to kind of maintain that structure of making sure that I am always professional in my interactions with both the Hill and with the agency head, that they can always rely, regardless of my personal belief, that whatever I say or report on is going to be objectively accurate and also independent of any type of politics.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Obviously, democracy doesn't work if the federal government isn't accountable to the very people it serves. And so transparency and accountability are critical, and that's always how I've seen the Inspector General role. So I appreciate that. And I want to, towards that end, follow up on what Senator Helmy was just talking about. The IRS obviously has a responsibility to deliver effective and timely services to all taxpayers. During the 2024 filing season, the IRS processed 40 million calls with an average wait time of around 3 minutes. This shows real progress from previous years that had unacceptably long call wait times. And I will just say, especially during the pandemic and post-pandemic, we just had constituents calling saying, I've been on the phone for hours and I can't get through. And so it has become a major focus of a lot of our constituent service teams to try to help constituents get through, literally, to the IRS. So there's been some progress. The IRS needs to continue building on this in the upcoming tax season. If confirmed, how would you use your role to oversee IRS efforts to improve taxpayer services generally?
So as I noted earlier, I think one way is to shine a spotlight on it and make sure that those programs and any changes are being evaluated and the facts are being found and that the recommendations and the findings are being reported to Congress so that you're aware of it. And if there's positive trends, Congress should be aware because that may impact what type of legislation or lack of legislation you think needs to happen or funding. But if there are new problems or recurring problems, again, I think that that's something that Congress needs to have to be able to make the right decisions legislatively.
Well, I appreciate that, and following up also on what Senator Hemley said, that reaching out to our constituent service teams and garnering information from them may be a very important resource for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I thank my colleagues. Senator Whitehouse is next.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Johnson, I'd like to tell you a story that begins with the Citizens United decision of the Supreme Court, which can only be read to stand for the proposition that anonymous large political donations are corrupting, which is why that whole discussion about how the big donations it unleashed would be transparent was necessary to the decision. And of course, it was false that they would be transparent. We've been flooded with dark money, and one of the vehicles for this corrupting dark money has been the IRS-approved 501c4s and 501c3s. Now, once groups started pushing political donations through 501c4s, the IRS made a rather clumsy effort to review them. And because most of it was right-wing political influence, most of the entities were right-wing political entities. And so the right-wing faux outrage machine lit up against the IRS that they were selectively and politically attacking right-wing groups, et cetera, et cetera. Sadly, the Obama administration rolled over for that, missed the teaching moment, and did not stand up for the IRS or its own commissioner. And the House went nutty and started to threaten impeachments, and they took the junior person in the department and referred them for criminal prosecution to the Department of Justice. In essence, they terrorized the IRS. And the result is that examination and enforcement in the 501c4 space has more or less evaporated. Nobody wants to touch it. It's the hot stove. And I think it's important for somebody in an inspector general role not only to find wrongdoing, but also to look for those gaps where the agency is supposed to do its job and has just backed away and won't do it. So in that regard, the 501c4 problem has become more and more and more acute. And there are some new tricks that have developed. The original 501c4s could only do 49% of the big donors' donation into politics. So for big donors who would happily spend tens of millions of dollars to get tens of billions of dollars in benefit, that was fine. It was basically a 100% fee on the money that you were sending off to do your political work. And they paid it willingly, but as they got better at it, they realized they didn't need to. And their operatives began to do things like set up multiple 501c4s. So, and since all of these are just corporate shields, you can get 5 501c4s that you control in a room, and in the same afternoon, convey, let's say, $10 million to the first 501c4, which puts 5 into politics, and then $5 million to the second 501c4, which puts 2.5 into politics, and then 2.5 to the third 501c4, which puts 1.25 into politics, and then, you know, onward down the chain. And at the end of the afternoon, you've put 90+% of your money into politics in violation of the principle that you shouldn't put more than 50% into politics by the simplest of charades, which is having multiple phony 501c4s all in a room together. To my knowledge, there's never been an examination of that behavior, not once. There have been, I think, 1,000 referrals about 501c4 misconduct that never went anyplace, got buried somehow over there. The other trick that has emerged is the 501c3, 501c4 conjunction. 501c3s, let's just say that in politics, the state of the art now is to have your 501c4 with its affiliated 501c3. Very often, same location, same staff, same donors, same, like a corporate veil between the two that you could pierce with a banana. And yet, the IRS won't look at that because, again, it's too hands-off. This is the hot stove that they refuse to touch. So there's an enormous amount of cheating going on. If you look at the Bonta case in the Supreme Court, The nominal entity in that case was something called for Americans for Prosperity Foundation, which is the 501c3 twin of Americans for Prosperity, which, if you know anything about politics, you know is the Koch brothers' biggest political battleship in their political influence armada. So the idea that this is just some lonesome little friendly 501c3 being picked on by the California government was preposterous. So I really encourage you in your role to remember this story. I will actually write an expanded version of it to you after you're confirmed in a letter so that you have this in front of you, believe it or disbelieve it, but I think it's really important that this be looked into, and if I could take an extra 15 seconds, I know Senator Warren is here. The other thing that relates to this is that the IRS refuses to make referrals to the Department of Justice in this area. And the Department of Justice, in reciprocal fashion, refuses to take obvious, for instance, 18 U.S.C. 1001 false statement cases unless the IRS has made the referral. So you have these two fielders standing next to each other with a gap that neither one will cover, and fly ball after fly ball after fly ball falling in until the field is full of unfielded balls. And I think that has to be fixed too. I think there is some kind of informal policy at the IRS that in this area they will not make referrals to the FBI, even when it's as plain and simple and vanilla and bread and butter as a false statement, where you have a statement under oath in one federal agency and a statement under oath in another federal agency, and the two of them do not align. That ought to be a key to opening up some investigation and asking some questions. And with that, I'll yield back. Thank you.
I thank my colleague, and I very much share your concern with respect to abuse of nonprofits for political purposes. Senator Warren.
Thank you. And welcome today, Mr. Johnson. So the IRS brings in about 96% of the federal revenue that funds investments in everything from roads and bridges to firefighters and school teachers. The IRS is also the largest benefits administrator overseeing tax credits that help millions of Americans. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, or TIGTA, since we're all into these acronyms, the job that you've been nominated for plays a critical role in making sure that the IRS is doing its job. So, Mr. Johnson, you've been nominated for this role, and you bring experience from over a decade serving as a federal prosecutor and your work as assistant IG at the Department of Veterans Affairs. So today I just want to ask you a little bit about how you would use your experience. Just last month, the acting IG published a report identifying 9 major management challenges at the IRS, from IT to taxpayer rights. It is a long list because the IRS is a big agency and it has a lot to do. So, Mr. Johnson, what do you see as the most critical set of challenges, and how do you set priorities to make sure that the agency is addressing those challenges?
Well, thank you for the question, with the caveat that I am not at TIGTA yet, and I would need to get there, talk to people, review what's in the pipeline, and understand the state of affairs, including organizational structure and competence. I would say that, I have reviewed kind of the major management challenges that TIGTA has already identified. They seem very common sense. I believe that, the protection of taxpayer data is extraordinarily important. Taxpayer services to constituents is very, very important. I think all of that wraps into IT modernization and making sure that the IRS has the best workflows, given that trillions of dollars are flowing through it, and it has almost 100,000 employees. I believe that similar to VA, where I currently work, there are a number of legacy systems that are outdated, that don't talk to each other, and therefore cause inefficiencies and deficiencies in the ability for the IRS to operate properly. And so I would take my experience in enforcement as an SEC enforcement attorney, as a former federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crimes, including structuring and money laundering and tax crimes, as well as my management experience now at one of the largest OIGs, where I personally supervise over 270 employees assigned to offices nationwide, and then part of a OIG that provides oversight for the VA, which has over 400,000 employees. So I believe that I have the requisite experience and background to be able to provide that appropriate oversight to an agency like the IRS.
Well, I appreciate that, and particularly your focus on the IT systems. I think that's very important. The other report that I want to ask about is the TIGTA semi-annual report to Congress that came out earlier this year. That report lists dozens of TIGTA audits, inspections, evaluations that still had unimplemented recommendations, some of them going back as far as 2016. Now, I will confess, this is something that has long stuck in my craw. In fact, I helped pass bipartisan legislation in 2018 to require enhanced reporting of unimplemented recommendations at federal agencies. It makes no sense for the IGs to do all of this great work and then have the agencies turn around and drop the ball or simply refuse to put those ideas into action. It is a problem at the IRS, but it is a problem across all of government. Mr. Johnson, I know that agencies are not required to implement recommendations from IGs, but how can you best ensure that the IRS is listening to TIGTA and acting on your recommendations and the recommendations of your predecessors?
So I think the relationship between the agency head and the IG is a big driver in how those recommendations are or are not going to be implemented. If there's a level of professionalism and trust, I think that, for example, at the VA, it's more likely to happen. I think if it's acrimonious and the IG's work is not cannot be defended, then I think you have a problem. So what you really want to get is a qualified IG who will have accurate and unbiased information that it can provide, recommendations. And then I think it's really important for the IG to stay on the issue. I think it's important that the IG does not just publish a report with recommendations and then move on to the next report. If these are important issues that the agency needs to remedy in order to better function, then the IG needs to stay on those issues and continue to make them known to the public, to Congress, most importantly, because Congress has legislative authority, and in detail. So one of the things that I would like to do is make sure that Congress has the information it needs to do to make legislative changes, systemic changes, and funding decisions, because I believe that as the IG, I have no actual authority to make change, but I do have the authority to shine the spotlight on issues.
There you go. There you go.
And I
appreciate that. When it comes to making the IRS more efficient or more effective, you have my full support. And if there's anything you need from Congress, I hope that you will return and let us know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. I want it understood, Mr. Johnson, I share Senator Warren's views on these issues of problems that need a remedy. And we look forward to working with you. Senator Young.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for appearing before this committee. Earlier this year, Charles Littlejohn was sentenced to prison for disclosing thousands of tax returns to ProPublica. Mr. Johnson, as you likely know, my Republican colleagues and I took great interest in this situation, and we were frustrated, to put it charitably, that it took the IRS and the DOJ quite a long period of time to identify the leaker and to ultimately bring him to justice. Looking to the future, I'm concerned that there will be another IRS employee, whether that's a full-time employee or perhaps a government contractor, that will make inappropriate disclosures that may inappropriately exploit their position and their access to the most sensitive records, taxpayer information, and to do so for political gain, possibly. So I just want should be an easy question. In your opinion, is it ever acceptable, sir, for an IRS employee or contractor to disclose confidential information illegally, yes or no?
is never appropriate.
Okay. I'll note that Mr. Littlejohn admitted to leaking confidential information about thousands of taxpayers. The Biden administration chose to charge him on a single count, one count, of unauthorized disclosure of taxes. Thousands of taxpayers affected, one single count. So if you're confirmed to this position and an IRS employee or a contractor illegally discloses confidential taxpayer information during your tenure, will you recommend to the prosecutor in the case that the individual be charged for each violation? Yes or no, sir?
As a former prosecutor, I think that it is really important to take every case on a case-by-case basis in terms of what the recommendation would be. Ultimately, it would be the Department of Justice that would make that determination, not the investigating agency, not TIGTA. But if the point of your question is, do I believe that unauthorized access and disclosure of taxpayer information is one of the most serious offenses? Yes, I do.
Actually, the point of my question is to get clarity on whether you will overlook accounts of unlawful disclosure and recommend something less than charging for each violation. And so what I'm hearing from your response is there may in fact be times in which it's not appropriate to charge a leaker for each individual offense. Is that accurate?
That's not accurate. It would be up to the Department of Justice to make those determinations, but I will tell you.
So what would you recommend in this capacity for which you have been nominated, and you seek my vote for confirmation?
Yes, Senator. I mean, respectfully, I would have to say it would be a case-by-case basis, but as a general concept, I take these cases very seriously, and I don't want you to misinterpret what I'm saying is that I disagree with the sentiment that you're making.
Yes, sir.
I deal with the sanctity of veteran health records at the VA-OIG. As the head of the Office of Investigations, when we find out that there's been unauthorized access to a veteran information, we take each one extraordinarily seriously.
And then let me just allow you to unpack it. Please be brief. I have a limited amount of time. Under what circumstances would you not recommend that there is a prosecution in a case of a violation of the law? Illegal.
Yeah, I don't know that would happen. I thought your question was more geared towards whether I would recommend multiple charges or a single charge in the resolution of a criminal case. And under because of the sentencing guidelines, the sentence may ultimately be the same. But again, the facts and circumstances matter. I know with many cases where there are victims, it is very important that each victim be represented as an individual count, and I have recommended those before.
All right. I'm going to continue with the hypothetical with your indulgence.
Sure.
Assuming you're confirmed and there's another illegal IRS data disclosure that happens on your watch, do you commit to investigating the matter as promptly as possible, providing majority and minority staff of this committee with monthly updates regarding your investigation? Monthly updates, yes or no?
I don't know the level of updates I would be able to provide if there's a criminal investigation, because there are laws that prevent disclosure.
What laws would preclude you from providing monthly updates to this committee? As someone who has been nominated, seeks my confirmation vote for this position, you should be versed in those laws, I assume.
I would endeavor to provide you all the information that I can under the law, because I do believe in transparency, and I do believe that Congress has an important oversight role and that you need to be equipped in a timely fashion. But I do believe that there are.
And if that is permitted under the law, you would be willing to pledge here to provide this committee with those monthly updates. Is that accurate, sir?
Consistent with law, yes.
Okay. I routinely hear from community foundations and other philanthropic organizations in my state about the importance of anonymous donations. Unfortunately, some states have targeted these donors to reveal their identities, despite donors' First Amendment protections. For that reason, Senator Langford and I have introduced the Protecting Charitable Giving Act earlier this year. The legislation would help nonprofit organizations better protect the identities of their donors by reinforcing existing privacy protections and increasing penalties for disclosure of sensitive taxpayer data. Mr. Johnson, do you believe that charitable giving serves a valuable role in society? Yes or no?
Yes.
Do you also agree that existing laws regarding illegal disclosure of charitable donor information should be vigorously enforced? Yes or no?
I think all laws should be enforced.
And that would include these?
Yes.
Yes. If confirmed, do you commit to working with myself and members of this committee to ensure donor information is secure from illegal disclosure?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, sir. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. Just a couple of points, and we're going to wrap up. First, in the instance of the most recent unlawful disclosure, Mr. Littlejohn is now facing prison of 5 years, a 5-year sentence, because this is unlawful conduct, number one. And number two, I want to just put into the record the history of the committee always working on these matters with that kind of principle in mind, and we've done it in a bipartisan way. I think Senator Crapo remembers that the late Orrin Hatch worked with both sides of the aisle on these issues, and I just want it understood on our watch that will always be the case. This is unlawful conduct. In the instance of the most recent case that was just discussed, Mr. Littlejohn faces a 5-year prison term. So we're making it clear that this is priority business to make it understood by everyone. This is unacceptable conduct. It will face serious criminal prosecution and, in the case of the most recent instance, 5-year sentence. So with that, I'd like to thank all of our members today for their participation. We want to thank Mr. Johnson for his responses. I want it understood based on what I have heard today. I will strongly support his nomination, and I will urge all members to do so. He's had an impressive career at DOJ and in the IG community. He's well qualified to serve as the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration. Regarding questions, for the record, the deadline for members to submit QFRs will be this Tuesday, November 19th at 5 p.m. The deadline is firm. I want to thank all of my colleagues on both the Republican side and the Democratic side for participating today and raising important questions. The deadline for members to submit is firm. We thank everyone for their cooperation. Finance Committee is adjourned.